Welcome to the Yoga Hour, offering insights and practices for spiritually conscious living in today's world. Here is your host, Dr. Laurel Trujillo.
Welcome to the Yoga Hour, where we talk about yoga in all its depth and breadth as a path to spiritually conscious, fulfilled living in today's world. I'm Dr. Laurel Trujillo, host and producer of the show. And today we are celebrating the life of Lahiri Mahasaya, the bliss-filled father of Kriya Yoga, one of the revered teachers in our Kriya Yoga lineage. I did want to mention also that later today, this is September 30th, 2021, later today, Yogacharya O'Brian will be offering a special online meditation and inspirational talk about Lahiri Mahasaya at noon Pacific time. You can access that by just going to the website csecenter.org, and you'll see a link for that noon program on the home page. I am delighted to be joined today by the founder and spiritual director of the Yoga Hour, Yogacharya Ellen Grace O'Brian. Yogacharya O'Brian is a spiritual teacher, writer, poet, and the spiritual director also of the Center for Spiritual Enlightenment, a Kriya Yoga meditation center with headquarters in San Jose, California. Yogacharya O'Brian teaches nationally and internationally and has received several awards, including recently receiving the New Thought Walden Award for Interfaith and Intercultural Understanding, which you can learn more about at unity.fm. She also received community service awards, including the Mahatma Gandhi Award for the promotion of religious pluralism. Her latest award-winning bestseller, The Jewel of Abundance, Finding Prosperity Through the Ancient Wisdom of Yoga, was published by New World Library and is available through Yogacharya's website, also on Amazon. You can find out more about Yogacharya's books and online programs at ellengraceobrian.com. O'Brien is O-B-R-I-A-N, ellengraceobrian.com, and csecenter.org. You can also follow her on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube by searching for Ellen Grace O'Brian. Welcome, Yogacharya O'Brian. I'm delighted to have you with me again on the Yoga Hour.
Thank you, Dr. Trujillo. It's a joy to be here, especially on this day commemorating the great yogi, Lahiri Mahasaya. And I want to offer my greetings to all of the listeners and subscribers to Yoga Hour. I'm grateful that we have this online satsang, this online spiritual community.
Me too. So before we dive into our conversation about Lahiri Mahasaya, let's dive in to a yoga moment, a moment of contemplation. So let's begin right where we are by bringing our attention to our body. Just feeling our body in space, and particularly feeling any surfaces that support our weight. So just being aware of where our feet are, perhaps touching the floor. If we're sitting in a chair, feeling the areas the chair supports our weight. And then turning our attention to our breath. This wonderful tool that's always with us. Just noticing as we take a fully conscious breath. Noticing the next inhale and exhale. On the next inhale, feeling the cool air in the nostrils. And on the exhale, feeling how that air has been warmed as it passes through our lungs. Not trying to change the natural flow of our breathing, but just noticing. And as we rest here, right where we are, here is something to contemplate. Some inspiration from Lahiri Mahasaya. God is the spiritual self of all. Think not that God is not present in the objects of nature. God is the hidden spirit of all. God is the indwelling soul of every person. God loves us so fully that he abides with us all constantly. God is within and around us always. Lahiri Mahasaya also said, the light of God shines in perpetual brilliance at the inner door of the spiritual eye, which leads to the presence of the indwelling God. Soul alone knows the way to the cosmic soul. Always remember that you are a soul and that your soul is the spiritual child of God. Once again, Yogacharya O'Brian, it's really wonderful to have you join us today on, as you mentioned, the birthday of Lahiri Mahasaya, September 30th, 2021. It would have been Lahiri's 197th birthday, and also the anniversary of his Mahasamadhi, or his transition from this physical world, was just a few days ago on September 26th. We celebrate Lahiri as a master teacher in the lineage of Kriya Yoga teachers, whom we honor at the Center for Spiritual Enlightenment. And for those not familiar with this lineage, it was described in the autobiography of a yogi. The teachings of Kriya Yoga have been disseminated throughout the years from guru to disciple, from teacher to student. Our particular lineage begins with a teacher named Mahavatar Babaji, who was the guru of Lahiri Mahasaya. Lahiri was the guru or teacher of Sri Yukteswar, who was the guru of Paramahansa Yogananda. Roy Eugene Davis was a direct disciple of Yogananda and is also Yogacharya's guru. We honor these teachers as great masters of these teachings of Kriya Yoga, who brought them, who made them accessible for us to be able to be here today. More about Lahiri Mahasaya. He was the guru of Yogananda's parents as well. And when Yogananda was a baby, Lahiri did bless him. Lahiri is called the father of modern Kriya Yoga. Lahiri was a householder, meaning that he was married, had children. He worked in a job as a government accountant. The story is told that for his work, he was transferred to a city at the base of the Himalayas. One day, while walking in the hills, he heard a voice calling to him. After climbing further, he met his guru, Mahavatar Babaji, who initiated him into the techniques of Kriya Yoga. Babaji told Lahiri that the rest of his life was to be given to spreading the Kriya Yoga message. In addition to being a spiritual teacher, Lahiri Mahasaya had 5 children, had a wife, and worked full-time, teaching Kriya Yoga at night. He understood how our work in the world should be and can be an important part of our spiritual awakening. Lahiri said, there are 2 kinds of work. The one is the expression of soul's righteousness in the objective world, and the other is the awareness and unfoldment of the innate divine attributes of the soul within one's own subjective consciousness. Both of these are spiritual work. So Yogacharya, Lahiri had this is a wonderful example of us how awakening fully is not incompatible with living skillfully in daily life. So how is the way Lahiri Mahasaya lived and taught, how does that serve as an example to us here today in the modern world?
Well, thank you for that inspiration and that to sort of dive into learning about Lahiri Mahasaya. You know, his guru, Mahavatar Babaji, told him that his role in his lifetime would be to set an example of an exemplary spiritual life, spiritually oriented life in the world. And that's what he did. And this quote that you offered from him about 2 kinds of work really helps point to that. And I think, before we are spiritually awakened, or before we make that turn onto the spiritual path in life, we really see only one kind of work in which we're here to accomplish something, to achieve something, and we look for our happiness, for our success, for our security in whatever that quote unquote work is that we feel we're here to do in the world. And that work is useful, and often it helps us mature. It can contribute to the formation of our character, and it can be supportive of our family and community, so all those things. But the problem is that we want something more than what it can give us. And so at some point, we come to the realization that the happiness we're seeking cannot be found in the outer work alone. And that is what we're seeking, is to be found, through the inner pathway of self and God realization. And on the path of Kriya Yoga, we have the 8 limbs that are recommended in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. And the first 5 of those limbs are outer. They begin with our relationship with the world, our relationship with ourself, and the purification of the body and the mind, and then learning how to develop this inner life. But the last 3 steps of those 8 steps of yoga are about the inner life and the mind, the prana, the energy, and superconscious awareness. So both are important, and they need to work together.
Absolutely. Lahiri Mahasaya was initiated, as I mentioned, into the practices of Kriya Yoga by Babaji, and then Babaji directed him to teach and initiate others. So let's talk a little bit about initiation. What is the role of initiation in the Kriya Yoga tradition?
It's foundational. Initiation is foundational in the Kriya Yoga tradition. It's the gateway to the mystical experience that Kriya practice makes possible. And it's also the connecting link to our relationship with the saints and sages in the tradition. Through the practice itself is how that link is established, because then one is able to experience the superconsciousness that's taught, and that brings you into communion with the Kriya masters. And initiation also signifies, of course, a turning of our life, a sanctification of our life. As I was just mentioning about the inner and outer, it's that opportunity where we begin the inner journey. And initiation, means to initiate, to begin. So it is that time when we make that turn towards the focus of the inner life and living with higher purpose. It's also a time to, in a sense, become new, to let go of the past ideas, past experiences, past ideas about yourself, and become open to realizing your true self and then living that in the world.
Mm-hmm. On the topic of Kriya Yoga, Lahiri said, Om and Kriya constitute the secret of meditation. Again, Om and Kriya constitute the secret of meditation. By meditation on Om and the practice of Kriya, the fulfillment of the highest spiritual aspiration is attained. Would you say more about what he is referring to in this quote about the secret of meditation and the highest spiritual aspiration?
Yes, that's about the deeper mystical teachings of Kriya. And so I want to circle back just for a moment to this role of initiation as the opportunity to purify the heart and the mind so that one can have those deeper experiences through that connection, through practice. And through taking that step with commitment onto the path, and the opportunity to live intentionally and experience this realization. One of the things that Lahiri Mahasaya taught that I think is really helpful for us on the path today is that even if we are spiritually oriented in life, there's still a need, because Lahiri Baba himself was a spiritually oriented man. He came from a deeply spiritual family. He was steeped in the scriptures. So it wasn't like, he was missing that. But even when we have that, there's a need for guidance on the path. There's a need for God's grace and grace of the Guru, and there's a need for focus in order to realize this truth, a way of turning our life. And he said, a lifetime is not sufficient to master all the scriptures. So know the essence of the scriptures. So that, I think, is a great support, because as seekers, we have the idea that we're going out and we're gathering information. We're learning about this path or that path, or being introduced to this scripture or that scripture, and in modern times, it's kind of like, well, whatever floats your boat, whatever turns you on. But that's just skimming the surface. And all of that phenomena is infinite. And so what Lahiri is pointing to is learn what is the essence of all of that. What is at the heart of all of that? And then you offered this beautiful quote about Om and Kriya constituting the secret of meditation. So, the Kriya secret of meditation is to still the mind through breath regulation and through the ascent of prana, our vital force, that leads us beyond mental phenomena, beyond intellectual understanding, into the direct experience of God's omnipresence, which is signified by Om, by the primordial sound that we can hear. Lahiri said, Om is the Guru's voice. It is the divine name resounding within us. And this purifies the mind, it uplifts us, and then ultimately it aids in transcending the changing phenomenal world into the experience of the eternal pure existence, being the highest samadhi.
Mm-hmm. So in that quote, when he said, Om is the Guru's voice, he was talking about the big Guru, the big, the real Guru as God.
Yes. Right? And yes, it's true. And of course, it's all one. That is the truth that we come to see. Guru as the light that dispels the darkness of ignorance. Guru is one's teacher who opens our understanding to that. Guru is one's self. Guru is your divine self. Guru is God. So all of that.
Mm-hmm. Lahiri Mahasaya is called the father of modern Kriya Yoga. And this is one thing I truly appreciate about him, because he really understood how important it was, not just for monks and isolated yogis in caves in the Himalayas, but for everyday people, just like himself, for people from different religions, and also particularly important, I think, for me and women as well as men, which was something when you think about when he was alive and when he was teaching in the 1800s, was not necessarily, I think, a widely held view that should be the case. So what was when you reflect on that, can you speak about how this was so groundbreaking and important to us now?
Well, it's indicative of awakened consciousness to recognize that there's no gender, there's no social strata, there's no ethnicity to the soul. There's no reason for those constraints against spiritual practice. Those are all outer constraints. And so, because Lahiri Mahasaya was a realized being, he saw that, beyond the outer regulations. He was a proponent of the inner realized life. And the masters of Kriya Yoga, Mavatar Babaji, Lahiri Mahasaya, Swami Shri Yukteswar, Paramahansa Ji, my Guruji, all saw the need for spiritual awakening in this world. And Lahiri said it's the one thing that will bring the peace that we need, the healing that we need. And we can see that today, that, the great need that we have for a sanctified vision of this world, so that we're not caught up in these petty divisions, whether it's between men and women or political parties or humanity and earth. This vision of all of it as God, all of it is holy, all of it is sacred, calls us to live in right relationship with one another and right relationship with the earth. Lahiri said, if your yoga practice doesn't result in love and desire for God realization, then it's not yoga.
No, that's very profound. I really like that. So in my introduction, I talked about the lineage and the passing of these Kriya Yoga teachings from guru to disciple, which is something that I have always appreciated about these teachings, that they are not altered to fit the teacher's ideas, but are teachings that have been proven from generation to generation. For those listeners who may not be as familiar, how would you define the words guru and disciple?
Well, in simple terms, you can define them as teacher and student. But as we've been talking this morning, Lahiri Mahasaya's gift was to bring the mystical awareness, the deepest understanding forth for those who had the ears to hear. And so that teaching is that, yes, there is a teacher, and I often think of the teacher as like the matchmaker, to introduce you to the love of your life, which is God and which is your own self. And so in the deepest sense, yes, guru is your outer teacher who supports you, but what that outer teacher does is introduce you to God and God dwelling within you as your own self. So, what is the significance of guru on the spiritual path? Well, guru is everything. So, and for me, I was thinking, how would I describe it? I would say, well, guru is the anchor. Guru is that, it means the light that dispels the darkness. It also means heavy, as in profound. So it's that which, holds us to a spiritually oriented life and keeps us from, drifting away in our little boat of desires. And guru is a window. Guru is a window in which to see a vision of the world as holy. Guru is a flame, a light in our life, and also a flame of transformation, of calling us to self-discipline. Guru is a key to unlocking the wisdom of our own soul. Guru is grace, is God's supportive influence. Guru is your own self. And I think when I think about guru and disciple, I think as a disciple, you can meet the guru, but how could you meet the guru if you are not a disciple?
Yes. Yes. We only have about 30 seconds left before I need to transition to the break. Maybe when we come back, we can talk a little bit more about the relationship between Lahiri and his guru, Mahavatar Babaji, and what that shows us, perhaps, about discipleship.
Absolutely. If you've read the autobiography of a yogi, and if you haven't, of course, I recommend it. But when you do, you read this very fantastic story of Lahiri's meeting with his guru, Mahavatar Babaji. But when we come back from the break, let's talk about what that can mean for us.
Yes. You're listening to the Yoga Hour with author, poet, and spiritual teacher Yogacharya O'Brian. We're discussing the life and legacy of the great Kriya Yoga master, Lahiri Mahasaya. Yogacharya offers many online classes and programs and has authored several books. You can learn more about her teaching, and her books at her website, ellengraceo'brien.com. Also from the Center for Spiritual Enlightenment website, csecenter.org. We welcome your comments and questions. You can contact us at our website, theyogahour.com. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Yoga Hour, insights and practices for spiritually conscious living.
Welcome back from the break. I'm Dr. Laurel Trujillo, host and producer of the Yoga Hour, and I'm here with Yogacharya Ellen Grace O'Brian talking about the life and teachings of Lahiri Mahasaya. As we were talking right before the break, Yogacharya, we were talking about the Lahiri's relationship with his guru, Babaji, and what that can teach us about discipleship itself. Let's pick right up, right there.
That sounds great. And I was saying that when you read the autobiography of a yogi, there's a temptation, I think, to read those really fantastic stories as either mythological or profoundly spiritual, and therefore completely about somebody else in some other time and some other place, and interesting and inspiring, but hard to make the connection to your own life.
Yes.
But I think it's really important to do that, and that's the purpose. That's why Yogananda put them in his book. I mean, not just to pay tribute to these yoga masters, but also to show us some things about the eternal relationship of guru and disciple. For me, Autobiography of a Yogi is a book about discipleship and about the journey of discipleship, even, starting there with Lahiri Mahasaya, who was an enlightened sage. We see his development as a disciple. So that's really important for us to look through that lens. And we see Paramahansa Yogananda's development as a disciple, which he lays bare, in his book, which is just lovely. But so I say, look at the story, look at some of the elements in the story of Lahiri Baba's meeting with Mahavatar Babaji, and see if you can sort of name and pick out these elements. And, one of them was that, initially he was called to the meeting with Babaji. And, it didn't happen all at that first encounter. He was called to come, like the next day to the meeting. And he had doubts about whether it was useful or not, whether he should go or not. Right. And, and you think, wow, here is this amazing transformative meeting that changed his whole life. And he had doubts about whether he should even go. And, when I look at my own journey, the same thing happened to me. Someone invited me to attend, a lecture that my guru, Roy Eugene Davis, was giving in town. And I was like, oh, I don't know, I kind of like, I'll have other things that I'm busy. And, and I can hardly bear to think about, what would have happened had I missed that meeting. So, look deeply, look at your life, look at how you were called, how you responded to that call, and what happened, when you met your teacher, when you found your path. And then there's another element that, before the initiation, Lahiri goes through a purification process that opens, gets him ready, for initiation. And so that's an element for us to look at as well. How ready are we at the time of initiation, or were we when we first received it? And when he meets Babaji, through that meeting, he remembers his soul life. And, there's a beautiful story in the book about how, he's shown his bowl and, items from his past sadhana. But for all of us, I think, if we look deeply enough, we can see that the meeting with our guru that opens our consciousness to the soul life is a way of remembering what our life is really about, coming to the teaching, coming to the path, meeting the guru. We remember, this is the purpose of my life. This is why I'm here. I always knew that, but somehow I forgot. So we also have that experience of having forgotten the significance of our own soul life. And then we have the meeting with the guru, and we remember, we're restored, reconnected to our own soul journey. And then, from that time on, from that meeting with Babaji, he wants to stay with Babaji. He doesn't want to leave. He begs him to stay. And, for those of us who are on a spiritual path where we have that relationship with the guru, that's the experience. We never want to leave the guru, because when we're blessed with the physical presence of the guru, we can generally hang out in divine remembrance, and it's very uplifting to the soul. So we don't want to go, but we always have to go. And what Lahiri discovers is that the guru is always with him. And any time, he calls upon that relationship, it is there for him. And so it's the practices that were given to him by his guru that make that connecting link that allows him to always be in that presence. And because it's not a physical presence, it's a spiritual connection. So all of these elements are there in our life. We just have to look deeply. And then, of course, from his guru, Lahiri was directed. He had work to do in this life, that the experience that he had of unbounded joy at God Communion wasn't just for him, that he had work to do to share that and make it available for people everywhere.
Which to me is one of the huge blessings of seeing that here he was, this householder with 5 children, it's a very busy house, had a job, and still remained so dedicated to his teaching and brought, this message forward so hugely that it's still resounding for us today, which is...
And that was because of his own enlightenment, his own transformation made that possible. Because he knew the essence of the scriptures. He had there's something like 26 or something around 26 commentaries of the scriptures by Lahiri Mahasaya. And he didn't write them down himself, but his students did. And so that's how they have come down to us. But, 26 books, 26 commentaries, commentary on the Gita, commentary on Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, all kinds of Vedanta commentaries on the Upanishads. so he was very productive.
Yeah. As we spoke about earlier, Lahiri Mahasaya taught about how to live in this world, but not be of it. As you teach, this is living a dharmic life. And in your recent talk on Living Simply, which I should also remind listeners is available on your YouTube channel, you offered this quote from Lahiri Mahasaya: "The world is an auspicious field for spiritual practice. You can attain self and God realization even while leading a worldly life." Again, the world is an auspicious field for spiritual practice. You can attain self and God realization even while leading a worldly life, which I think is such a great message as we can become discouraged, I think, of, thinking about if we have to give everything up in order to practice our spiritual life, in order to attain any kind of progress on the spiritual path. And so this is a really powerful message today. Would you say more about that? What did Lahiri mean when he said the world is an auspicious field for spiritual practice?
Yeah, and I was just smiling as you said the sorrow that we feel of thinking like somehow we would have to give everything up, in order to have a spiritual life. And it kind of made me chuckle because, what happens is we actually do have to give everything up.
Yes, thank you.
But it's a natural process.
But not in the way we fear, I guess.
Yeah,
that's
not
what
in
I
the
would
way
say.
that we fear. And it's a process through the process of discernment, we give up attachment, to things. And so that happens, that we do give things up, as our source of happiness or security. But in terms of that quote from Lahiri Baba, to understand that the world is a holy place brings such joy to my heart and peace to my soul. It's an error to see the world as otherwise. And I know that error of perception about the world is what has led to the degradation of our environment. It's what leads to injustice towards people, towards other beings. And so it's critical that we see the world as a holy place and that we see it all and realize it all as God, so we can live in right relationship to it. So it's an auspicious field, meaning it's a holy place, but also meaning it's a place that gives us everything that we need to awaken. Everything is there for us. We wake up to understanding the truth of what we are, and then the work is to live in harmony with that truth. And in order to do that, we have to purify the mind and body. And purifying the mind is clearing up past mental impressions or karmic impressions. And those are hidden from our view. And so being in the world, we bump into other people and to circumstances that show us our hidden erroneous beliefs, our hidden attachments, our hidden perversions. All of that is shown to us through the light of God that shines in the world. And then we can release those deep-seated errors that bind us in the world. So that's another reason why the world is auspicious, because it shows us what needs to be released in order to be supremely free. That's the function of the world. We're here to enjoy this life, to see it as sacred, to appreciate it, and then also to find freedom from it.
As you're talking, I was struck by how you really in your comments, you touched on all of the three main practices of Kriya Yoga, of self-discipline, self-study, and self-surrender. In just, your comments about how we see the world, how we relate to the world, and how it gives us this opportunity to see more of ourselves, which then gives us more to understand what our self-discipline practices need to be, which then leads to more of what we talked about earlier about surrendering everything, but not surrendering in a way of cutting it away from ourselves, but it's more of a sense of allowing it to fall naturally, like the fruit from a tree, right?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Another quote from Lahiri about Kriya Yoga. Kriya is subjective work. It is the work of the soul for the illumination of one's entire being with the light of God. In this illumination comes the awareness of one's own spiritual self. Many people, when they first learn about Kriya Yoga, think that it's just a breathing technique, and that is, I think, perhaps a common misperception about it, despite what I was just saying about the fact that Kriya Yoga is defined in the second book of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras 2.1 as those three practices that I mentioned: self-study, self-surrender, or self-discipline, self-study, and self-surrender. So what does Lahiri mean in this quote saying Kriya is subjective work?
Well, it's hard to know really what Lahiri means, but I would guess at that quote meaning that it's the inner work, and there's levels of inner work. There's the inner work of untying the knots of ignorance that bind us to the wrong perception of what we are. But then there is this subjective work of cultivating a higher consciousness. And that was really the shining light of Lahiri Baba's work, which is teaching disciples and witnessing for others who would come after what it is to abide in the highest consciousness in the world. So through the Kriya technique, he taught, how to rise above the fluctuations of mental perception, to experience directly the pure essence of being. And that is the deepest subjective work in which, you yourself are the subject experiencing the reality of your own self. There's, a sweet story about, that photograph of Lahiri Mahasaya that is the one that we have, where they wanted a photo of him, and he wasn't fond of photos. He said, well, what is the point? If you have a photograph of me or, any teacher like that, you take the photo and then you worship the photo and you miss the point. And so, the story is that when the photographer tried to take the photo of Lahiri, when he looked through the lens to see, he couldn't see the image of Lahiri until he was given permission to take that photo. And when Lahiri gave permission and he offered the photo that came out was a photo of Lahiri performing Shambhavi Mudra, which is peering through the third eye. And so you see in that photo, his eyes are partially opened, partially closed, which of course is a beautiful demonstration. I mean, not that we go about in Shambhavi Mudra with eyes open, partially, but he's showing you, look into the third eye. Let your inner gaze always be upward in the higher chakras. Come to see the world with this vision of self and God realization.
Here's another quote from Lahiri that speaks to the experiencing of ultimate reality. The person who has seen the light of God within never walks again in spiritual darkness. That person remains constantly aware of the sacredness of the body, the righteousness of the mind, the purity of the heart, and the divinity of the soul. That person who has seen the light of God within never walks again in spiritual darkness. That is such a beautiful, beautiful phrase. Never walking again in spiritual darkness. Would you say more about that?
It is a beautiful quote, and it's true, that what he's pointing to is we never forget the experiences of spiritual truth that we have. It's like Jesus saying, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. So the truth doesn't set you free unless you know it. So that's what he's pointing to. You will know. And here Lahiri Baba is saying, that one who has seen the light, the inner light, never forgets it. And that's true. So that's why, it's important to dive deep and have your own experience, because that is what is transforming. And that's what allows you to be constantly aware of the sacredness of this life. When Lahiri had his initiation experience, and he saw that palace that was manifested for him, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we get caught up in thinking about, well, did that really happen? And what was that palace and all of that? But again, when we look to what the experience taught, what Lahiri saw was the evanescence of the manifestation of the elements into form, and how that can come and disappear. It can appear and reappear and disappear. So he saw that was all ephemeral. Mm-hmm. And that changed his perception. So spiritual darkness is seeing only that outer manifestation and thinking that's all that it is. And it's like chasing a mirage. But seeing the light of God within oneself, within your own self, purifies the mind and opens our spiritual vision to this life being God, because we know God is within us, God is around us, God is the Guru, God is the Self, God is all there is.
So beautiful. Unbelievably, we have come to the last couple of minutes. In closing, what words of encouragement or inspiration would you like to leave with our listeners?
Thank you. I want to thank you for the Yoga Hour and for your work and the work of the team on Yoga Hour, and for this special time to meditate and contemplate the life of Lahiri Mahasaya. So, what he said is keep on keeping on, and behold, one day the goal. So I offer that, and I would say, find your path. If it's not Kriya Yoga, find your path, whatever it is, and then dive deep. Don't be like the one who searches for water by digging a bunch of shallow holes in the field, but find your path, find your spot, find your teacher, dig deep, find yourself.
How beautiful. And I love that quote from Lahiri. Keep on keeping on. And how does it go? And then behold the goal.
Yes.
Keep on keeping on and behold the goal. Really lovely, really something to take to heart. Keep on keeping on.
Yeah, and I think of my own beautiful guru, in the last talk that he gave, he often offered that quote from Lahiri Mahasaya, keep on keeping on, behold one day the goal, or, making, finally one day made. And, but in the very last talk that he gave here, for students here at our center, he offered the quote as doing, done. And I could feel the impact of his life, my guru's life, and his sadhana, his spiritual practice, his realization, and his karma yoga, his offering of his life, to all the disciples, and that he was finished.
Lovely way to bring our program to a close. You've been listening to the Yoga Hour. It's been my pleasure to share this time with you. I'm Dr. Laurel Trujillo, host and producer of the show, and we've been discussing the life and legacy of the great Kriya Yoga master Lahiri Mahasaya with the Yoga Hour's founder and spiritual director, Yogacharya Ellen Grace O'Brian. Yogacharya O'Brian is an acclaimed spiritual teacher, author, poet, and the spiritual director and founder of the Center for Spiritual Enlightenment in San Jose, California. Once again, you can find out much more about her books, online classes, different programs at her website, ellengraceobrian.com. You can also find her on Facebook and Instagram at Ellen Grace O'Brian. This program will be posted on our website, theyogahour.com, and all of Yogacharya's links, information will be posted there as well. Again, she has a YouTube channel you might want to tune into at Ellen Grace O'Brian. And once again, today, September 30th, 2021, Yogacharya O'Brian has a special online meditation and inspirational talk about Lahiri Mahasaya today at noon Pacific. You can just find that at csecenter.org with a link on the homepage. We encourage listeners to join us for the many online programs offered by Yogacharya O'Brian and the Center for Spiritual Enlightenment, including morning meditation, which occurs daily from 6:30 to 7:30 a.m. Pacific, afternoon meditation daily from 4 to 4:30 p.m. Pacific, and then Sunday satsangs from 10 to 11 a.m. Pacific. Next week, Yogacharya will be back to discuss another of the great teachers in our Kriya Yoga lineage, Swami Sri Yukteswar. The Yoga Hour is a service project of the Center for Spiritual Enlightenment. Remember to subscribe to the Yoga Hour podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you to the Yoga Hour team, founder and director, Yogacharya O'Brian, assistant producers Ann Hayes and Mickey Coronado, and as always, Jeff Comfort and Louis Pagan in the sound booth at Unity Online Radio.